All right, as you can see, I found some more brown paper to put underneath the yarn. And again, when I put my finger here, I'm really close to this piece of wood here. And this is 4 yards of heavy yarn. I might be able to have squeezed another yard onto this rigid Heddle loom. But again, depending on your rigid Heddle loom, you may be limited to 4 or 5, at the most 6 yards. It also depends on the thickness of the yarn and also the layers. Here I used some thin corrugated cardboard and also some paper. All right, so now we're going to be tying on same way that we normally do normally what I do for a floor loom. I'm going to split 2 of them in half and do the first knot. This time I'm starting on the ends just to keep the rod in place. So I'm going to do each side loosely. And that's for balance. I'll put it that way. It's for our balance reason. Well, I don't want to take all of those. There we go. And you can go, the smaller bouts that you use to tie on, the quicker you will come to the place where the fabric all starts to come together. You won't have as many gaps. So depending on what you want to do. All right, so we have that one started, one on both ends. And I can see this is the middle, so I'm going to have to work on both sides. See, this is in the rest position. And I do have the reed in the neutral position. I said the rest position. It's probably based on, I teach Tai Chi Cha, and we talk about the rest position is when we're standing still and resting. So again, we have in the neutral position, could use it that way. I'm going to tie it on both sides. I think I'll divide this in half. Some people are very particular and count the threads. Sometimes I'm just anxious to get started to do some of the weaving. Another group. And like I said, this is some really heavy, really soft cotton. Really nice for placemats. Probably do very nicely for larger towels too. Now this is where you make an executive decision. Do I tie on this side or the other side? I'm going to tie it on this side. Make sure I don't get caught in that one. All right. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to tighten all of them. Start. Now, right now I don't have the center brace on the stand. So if you have a rigid Heddle loom that's on the table, make sure that it's clamped down. I'm only doing the first tie right now. And remember, all of this is loom waste. So you have to factor that in your calculations, which is another instructional video you can pull up that I do. So now we have all of those. I did check earlier. This is another time, a good time to check to make sure you haven't made any mistakes. Because once you do the next tightening, you can see. Now I happen to eyeing it out. Looks good. I'm going to again go to the middle, tighten it. This time I'm going to do the other side of the square knot. You can also do a little tightening there too. Sometimes rolling that also helps. Again, next one. Next side. And again, you see I'm going back and forth, side to side. It's the same method used for floor loom and table looms that I've done. You could also do the lacing method on this, which is another good way. All right, so now everything's all tied on. Looks good. Okay, centered and everything. So the next thing we'll be doing is doing some weaving. But I need to decide what weft yarn to use, and I'll decide that, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, this is in the rest position, and we'll just keep it there. Here we are. The rigid Heddle loom is tied on. I also started to do some weaving. Since I don't do a lot of rigid Heddle weaving, most of the time I use a boat shuttle, I wanted to see if I could use a boat shuttle to weave on a rigid Heddle loom. So I wove a little bit. With this particular pattern, I'm making placemats, and I find that the yarn is very heavy, so if I use the heavy yarn that I'm going to use for most of the placemat, for the edges, it's going to be very thick. So what I'm doing is I'm starting with a thin yarn. And when you're doing a thin yarn, you can use a small shuttle. So the shuttle that you see there is actually a damask shuttle used for for weaving on looms when you're doing damask weaving, very thin, very, I guess its sheds are not very wide. It's also helpful if you're getting near the end. So I looked up some hints, and I'm going to show you weaving with a boat shuttle. There are many others out there. This one happens to be made by Glamacra to use on some of their looms, and some people use them on table looms. With this loom, or this shuttle, excuse me, you can see it's not very, maybe about 3/4 of an inch high. And in the middle is a cardboard pern, or not pern, but a cardboard shuttle that you're going to use. So rather than, you can use a straw, you could use other things. You can't use a regular bobbin, it would stick up on the edge. So this is a boat shuttle, and I'm going to show you that the first thing I'm going to do is, it's in the rest position, I'm going to press it down. One thing with the rigid Heddle, I find having a very stiff or firm shed and tightening it up is very important. So with this one, I'm going to take it and I'm going to throw the shuttle across. And now other people said about pinching. As you notice, I'm not pinching. Might be hard to see, but the yarn is diagonal. And I'm going to take the rigid Heddle and I'm going to move it toward. Now I'm going to take it to the top one. Now, when you go to the top, the bottom is not quite as firm as when you push it down. So I noticed that there was a person who had a trick, and her trick was to make a little bit of a race. So she's taking a thin stick, and we're going to take the shuttle, and we're going to throw it across. Look at there, went all the way across. And again, kind of tug a little bit. Put your shuttle down and bring everything toward you. Now, one thing about rigid Heddle looms, they are not as heavy as floor looms, so they tend to move on me. All right, so we're going to go down again. Take the very thin boat shuttle across. I saw a couple other manufacturers out there that make these, so you can probably find these if you want to try this. And then bring it in. And now as you go up to the top again, you can take a stick. I actually saw this where someone had a table loom, and it made life a lot easier. You shouldn't have to worry about the shuttle falling through. Cross. And again, you can tug a little bit if you want, the yarn. Down and put it together. Now I'm going to switch to the heavier yarn that I chose to use for weaving the rest of the placemat. I'm going to nip it there. Now I'm going to switch to a stick shuttle just because the yarn I'm using is a little heavy. I'm kind of doing a test right now. I want to see if I like this. It's a very light lavender, so I'm going to see if it's something I want to continue doing. I'm going to take the reed, put it in the bottom, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck this in to the shed that I'm going to put this one in. So it's a good idea to unravel a little bit. Take your shuttle through. And I'm going to allow it to stick out just a little bit, because when I bring this in, it's going to come in a little bit and overlap, and I can trim that later. Okay, now I go back up, making sure I have enough yarn that it's going to go all the way across. Take it through. Again, tug it a little bit. Bring it close. And then go down. And we're going to go back again. I have enough to go all the way across. Again, tugging it. And this is a thick, thin yarn, which is very nice for beginning weavers, because the you can hide, when you start the next thread, kind of hide a little bit the overlap. Go through. Again, you can tug it if you want. Bring everything close together. And I'm going to put this back in the rest position. I also find with rigid Heddle looms, at least in my experience, I do have to kind of tighten them every once in a while. They're not, the tension doesn't seem to stay as tight while you're weaving as it is on a heavier loom. But that's just the experience that I've had, and a lot of other experiences. So I like that. It's, like I said, a little bit of thick and thin. I could have used the same color that's in the same weight that's in the warp, but sometimes I don't want it quite as heavy, and it gives it a nice lighter look. So right now we're in this position. Let's do a couple of more. Going across your stick shuttle. Tugging it a little bit, again, releasing it, bringing it forward, going down, and making sure you have enough unwrapped as you go across. And I could also, it's kind of, whoop, looks like I left it in the same shed there, didn't I? All right, talking and demonstrating sometimes does that. Now, another thing you could do if you wanted to, if you have a shuttle that has a nice firm edge, you could also take this and beat with it, but we have the Heddle there to do that. So we're going to go, there's a little tug, again, come back in, and push it together. And we're going to put this back in that little neutral position there. So you can see what's going on. I'll try to maybe come in a little bit closer. You can see, oh, I think you can see pretty well. There you go, what's happening. And as it started with, they were up where we tied it on here. It was apart and it started to come together. And once this is taken off the loom, then it'll all come back together, and once it's washed. If I wanted to, I was thinking of doing a hem stitching, but again, I gave about a little more than 2 inches, so after it's washed, I'll be able to fold it over and sew it. Prefer that method for long-term use. Fringes sometimes don't stay looking as nicely as you want them to. So that's the end of this particular session on rigid Heddle looms. Thank you for watching.